Welcome to this webinar of September 2022 at Florida Gulf Coast University that is conducted through the Center for Supply Chain Excellence. As you now know, every second Wednesday of the month, we invite supply chain experts to talk to us on relevant supply chain issues. Today we have with us Mr. Brian Nagy. Brian is the Senior Demand Planning Manager at Starbucks. He has a very rich experience in demand planning and demand management. Last month, we had speakers from Amazon talk to us about their deep learning based forecasting method. This session, in a way, is extending that idea where we say that forecasting is just one part of the story, but managing demand, and especially in a consumer product like coffee, is very challenging. And what are the activities that can be done to manage these challenges? We have with us Brian Nagy. Take it over, Brian.
Our higher volume. Higher volume product that basically needs to get more rapidly replenished in our stores and things like that. So we have sort of two different distribution center types. From a forecasting perspective, it really doesn't matter except for the product that kind of flows through it, but just wanted to kind of clarify that. But backing up from the distribution center, you can see we basically have two main product flows that come in. We have green coffee. I'm oversimplifying this and I'm not going to talk about green coffee very much, but we have a very, very complex supply chain that kind of gets green coffee to life. You can imagine we're sourcing coffee from all over the world. It needs to land at the right time. We have specific coffees that go into specific blends, so it needs to be very, very well timed and calculated. But that green coffee is going to go into our roasting plants, get packaged, then ultimately go off to our customers and stores. And then on the other side, we have the supply products. So we have our suppliers, tier 1 suppliers, meaning they produce directly and ship to us. And then we have tier 2 suppliers that supply our tier 1 suppliers and then ship to us. So this is oversimplified. And if you saw this actually diagrammed out, it would be probably the size of my office, but it's a very complex network. But for the sake of today's conversation, just want to kind of keep it at this view. But we're forecasting at the distribution center level. We're trying to make sure we have the right product in our distribution centers to get to our stores. But we need to understand what's going on in our customers as well. So we have our Nestle partnership, which is basically our CPG part of our business. So that's when you go into a retailer and you see our packaged coffees for sale, that's going through our Nestle partnership. We have licensed stores. So our licensed stores are, if you go into Publix and you see a Starbucks in Publix or at the airport, we have college and university stores, things like that. Those are licensed stores. And then we have our company operated stores, which are essentially the ones we own. We have end-to-end visibility. Basically, once product gets through the distribution center to sells through the store, we have visibility to that end-to-end. So kind of three different models. They all work a little differently and the planners need to treat them all differently. But I'll mainly focus on the retail aspect of it today in our company owned stores just to kind of keep the conversation a little more focused on that piece. But just wanted to share that this is a sort of a high level diagram of how the product flows. And really quickly, what are we forecasting? We're forecasting weekly store orders. So what are the stores going to order, or what are we pushing to stores depending on the product? We have both models depending on the product type. We're forecasting in units at a distribution center and business unit level. So it's a pretty granular level, but it's really important that we have this for a lot of reasons. If you think about financial implications, projections, our licensed stores may not follow the same business plans all the time that our company-owned stores do, and so forth. So we really need to be able to differentiate those so we can prioritize and plan accordingly. I mentioned it earlier, but we have sellable and non-sellable items. So those are going to be very different. Our non-sellable items like an oven or something like that, that might only be going into new stores that are being remodeled. So we really need to understand what our construction plans are, what our new stores are going to look like. And we look at obsolescence models for ovens, let's say, that have been in stores for X years. We try to do a projection of how many of those are going to need to be turned over and things like that. So the data flowing into an analysis like that is very different than looking at our sales and trying to get that in-depth focus of customer data and things like that. So again, I'll just kind of keep calling that out as we go through because that is still a pretty significant portion of our SKU count and focus. So let me jump to the next slide. So I thought I'd go into this. Phases was probably not the best term, but I just wanted to kind of bucket this into three groupings. So you have a very traditional modeling starting point where we're starting. So we're still using a time series model. We have a 3-year history horizon. Planners can choose whether they want to use the 3 years or not. Obviously with COVID, some of that data may or may not be relevant for their product group or product type, just due to volatility, supplier disruptions, and so forth. And we're projecting a 2-year forecast systematically. Now we have tools where we extrapolate out 5+ years for capacity analysis and things like that, but that's not being done within our main forecasting tool as of today. But the statistical model is really just a baseline for our planning team to say, here's where we think the starting point of the business is. It's, it's just where we're going to start. Then we're going to layer on business intelligence. So I'm going to move forward to the business intelligence piece. So we're looking at things like promotions. What are we featuring from a product standpoint? What are we launching in those different seasonal launches that we're doing? Innovation. What new products are coming in? What was launched last year? And how does that play with the year-over-year volumes and things like that? So that's things we have to kind of consider. Think about all the different beverage options that are out there and all the configurations of those things. We need to take that into consideration as we're looking at innovation and how it hits the mix. Signage and marketing. This is huge. So if a beverage is going to be featured on signage in our stores, obviously that's going to drive a lot of traffic to that beverage. We need to be able to quantify that. But again, similar to what I just said, we also need to have an awareness of what was featured previously. How do we make sure we're not overstating those volumes, and knowing that, a beverage that was featured last year that isn't featured this year is not going to be overstated in our plans, because we ultimately need to plan the components that go into those beverages. I'll get into more of that in a sec. Social media. So we have a big social media presence. Our customers love taking pictures of our beverages and sharing with people, and that can have a really big impact. I'll give you one very specific example, and it was a very extreme one, but it was one we will always remember, those who had to work through it. It was called the Pink Drink, and I think it was 6 years ago, but this beverage, I think a barista kind of just made it up, posted it on social media, blasted it out there, and all of a sudden, within weeks, it just blew up nationally, and we're chasing tankers of coconut milk all over the place, just trying to support this volume. But those things are real, and we're a very visible company. Those things really do impact us. So it's something we need to be aware of. I say celebrities and influencers. That's another similar category of that. We had Oprah do something with one of our tea categories a couple years ago, blew the roof off. I worked for a different company where Ellen featured a product from a small company. We were doing about 200 units a day of this product. It went to 10,000 units a day instantly. And that manufacturer was behind on sales for the next, or shipments for the next 12 months, trying to keep up with production. So those things really do impact demand, and especially on spaces where you're not prepared for that, it can really catch you off guard. So we're trying to catch those things as quick as we can and predict that where we can. Portfolio and mix shifting. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there are a lot of things that kind of contribute to that. I mentioned a few of them already. But in beverage, we need to be constantly aware of where our customers are coming in, what beverages they're shifting to, because that has a direct impact on how we plan our components, which components we need to get to stores, and so forth. So it's really important that we understand that mix and how it's coming to life in stores. And lastly, just mention macro and economic drivers. Pretty obvious here, but looming recession conversations everybody's having right now. What are we going to do? What does that look like? How does that impact traffic? Those are things that are going to obviously have a direct impact on demand. So we're constantly trying to look at that and gauge the impact of that could potentially have on the business from a scenario planning standpoint. And then lastly, I'm going to move into demand sensing, and I probably understated it as a group in here, but it's probably the most important work we're doing, especially on the beverage team. Looking at sales trends and looking at that real-time data is so important to what we do on a day-to-day basis. We could not do our jobs without it. And I'll give you an example. Let's say we launch a new product last week. If that beverage is underperforming, let's say it's selling half of what we planned it to do, it's going to take a statistical modeling platform or a shipment history model weeks and weeks and weeks to see that, because our stores probably aren't going to start slowing down on their order, or the stores aren't going to order anything. So that signal is going to start trickling down, and it's going to create a bullwhip on the back end. And it may take your model 6-7 weeks to adjust to that. We can get that trend within 2-3 days and get in front of that and potentially make adjustments there and take some corrective actions before we're too far along that we can actually impact our plans and stuff like that. So that's one example of many. A lot of it is just really trying to get a read on where the products are going, how they're doing. Do we need to put more marketing into a specific product that maybe isn't performing to plan or something like that? So that is how we kind of identify those and bring some of those products to life. The only other thing I'll call out here is that we see a lot of micro and regional trends too. So weather is one big thing that can cause that. Obviously, you can imagine if it's January in Minnesota and it's 80 degrees out, we're probably going to sell some cold beverages that we wouldn't expect to sell. So we try to get a read on those things as quick as we can so we can make sure that we're getting the right cups and the right products to the stores to replenish and so forth. But there's a lot of different reasons. We have regional trends, and it's interesting when you start going through the data nationally too. There's a lot of regional preferences that are prevalent, and if we try to treat every store the same, we're going to have a lot of imbalance in our inventory. We're going to have a lot of transfers and things like that that are going to be highly costly. So it's really important that we understand this data. So this is a lot of the stuff we use. And I just showed you a generic snapshot of one of the Tableau tools that we just kind of use to analyze sales trends. There's obviously things we can drill into there, but this gets into how the product's selling, what that's doing to the mix, how it's impacting margin, those types of things. So we can get a real-time read on a daily or weekly basis and just get a live update on how our sales are performing on any given category or product. So pretty cool stuff. So let me move to the next slide. So I wanted to give you a more specific example, as I said. So kind of as we get into fall planning, I just wanted to kind of give you a day in the life thinking through what the demand planners have to consider and what goes into the planning process for doing something like even a small launch, like a fall LTO, we call it LTO, limited time offer, but a fall launch like pumpkin spice and pumpkin cream cold brew. So pumpkin spice has been around, I think, 19 years now. So, I mean, it's kind of unreal that it's been almost 20 years since we launched this, but pumpkin cream cold brew is a relatively new one. But as we're thinking about those, there's multiple beverage recipes that we need to have. And already you can see too there, the pumpkin spice that goes into pumpkin cream cold brew could be very different than what's going into pumpkin spice latte. We need to understand the recipe to get started, obviously. The sizes matter though too. What sizes are we projecting are going to sell? If we're selling more ventis than grandes, we're going to go through a lot more volume. That means we could put our stores at risk if we have that size imbalance wrong. So we need to be really on top of what's going on from a size perspective. The dairy, non-dairy consideration keeps getting more and more complex. Oat milk's the new hot thing. Everybody's loving oat milk. We're selling a lot of it. And as we consider dairy options, a lot of customers are trading out. It used to be whole milk, 2%, non-fat. How's that balance going to look? Now we have 4 non-dairy options that are very popular. That's going to increase. We need to get on top of how we have better tools to kind of triangulate that and identify those things so that we have the right dairy options in stock for our customers. Menu visibility in store, I won't touch on that again, but that has a huge impact on volumes, as I said. Beverage customization, this is huge. So since we've rolled out mobile order to pay, since more and more customers are interacting through the apps, we're seeing a huge increase in customization as customers are going in and, you know, putting in, I want to add more pumpkin spice to my pumpkin spice latte or whatever that might be. All those things have an impact on volume. All those things have an impact on demand, and we need to be on top of that so that we're aware of where those trends are emerging. We're moving in the right direction to support that volume. Waste is important. As you can imagine, if we send a bottle of vanilla syrup to the store, we're not selling every single ounce of that, right? There's going to be spillage. There's going to be overdosing, underdosing. The bottles can get damaged and get thrown away, whatever expiration might happen. There's a lot of different things that can happen from a waste perspective, but that's something else we need to be triangulating, because if we don't and we only send in inventory to support sales, we're not going to have enough volume for the stores, obviously. So that's huge. The next one is cups, lids, and straws. Sounds like a super easy thing, right? You gotta have cups, lids, and straws. That's simple. It's not simple at all. It's probably one of the most complex things my team has to deal with. We have certain municipalities that have specific compostability requirements. So they have specific cups, right? You might have another region that's like, well, we want this specific type of straw. So we have to adhere to all those regulatory things. But on top of that, we also have lids for nitro products, dome lids for frappuccinos, and things that take whipped cream. We have strawless lids, you name it. We have a bunch of different things. So if we don't know what our mix is going to look like from a sales perspective, we have no chance of having the right cups, lids, and straws to support sales. So it sounds, again, like a simple thing. It is not simple whatsoever. Cannibalization of other beverages, I mean, that's pretty obvious, but as we launch new beverages and things are mixing around there's going to be cannibalization of other things, even if our sales counterparts don't want to necessarily acknowledge that all the time. There is going to be cannibalization, and we need to factor that in. Otherwise, we're going to have expiration and overstock and risk on other products. Features on Starbucks app, you know, again, that's just another avenue for demand drivers, but we need to know where things are being featured and what that looks like. So we're planning for those accordingly. Again, I already mentioned regional preferences. The last one I'll say is store types. So store types matter because if you can imagine, I'll just come up with an obvious one here. So like packaged coffee that we sell for to go out of our stores, if a drive-through store is probably not going to sell a lot of packaged coffee. So we're not going to have a really high presence of packaged coffee in those stores, and we don't want to plan for those accordingly. So that's just one basic example, but the format of the store can really dictate what people do. We're going to sell more food if there's a bigger cafe where people are more comfortable to sit down and so forth. So that's a very important thing we need to factor in. So all those things kind of go into consideration and need to be integrated into our business plans. And as we're kind of looking at the overall mix, that's where we need to kind of step back and look at that total level and saying, okay, we added this new innovation in, we pulled this volume out. Now, what does that do to total refreshers? Do we really believe that the volume is still going to be here? And that's where we need to kind of assess at the high level, like, how's this looking? And we track with bias and other things. I'll get into that in a second. But the last thing I'll mention is that we have variable lead times for our products. It can be anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to 12 plus months for some of our equipment and things like that. So the need to understand these things is huge and important. And a lot of our equipment supports product launch, right? So they are very intrinsically linked, and we need to make sure that those strategies are aligned as we're trying to launch new products and tie those to equipment capabilities. So just wanted to kind of bring that as an example, just to kind of give a little flavor for what the planners are considering in their day-to-day. So how do planners kind of prioritize with all the item locations, the level of detail I mentioned? It's a lot of stuff for a planner to have to focus on a daily basis. So I just wanted to kind of talk about some of the basic things that we've been using for quite some time to help our planners prioritize. But a lot of this isn't rocket science or brand new stuff, but it's definitely effective, and it's helped us to kind of make sure we're focusing on the right things that matter. But this is a typical demand segmentation view. Some companies use a 4-box, some use a 9-box. It really doesn't matter. It's the same principle. But essentially, your ABC grid there is basically high, medium, low dollars. Some companies will use cost. Some will use margin. It doesn't really matter. It's really just weighting the priority of the SKUs for the business. And then we have a measure of volatility using coefficient of variation. So low volatility, meaning the item is highly statistically forecastable. Theoretically, the planner should not have to touch that item very much. The model should do the heavy lifting, and we're just managing by exception where needed, adding promotions and so forth. We have medium volatility, which means, the model is going to probably do okay, but we're probably going to have to do a little more hand holding, checking our exceptions a little more and things like that. And then as we get to high volatility, the system's probably not going to do a very good job of forecasting these at all. So it's going to require the planner to inject a lot of business intelligence and all those things we just talked about previously. They're going to have to spend a lot of time digging in and figuring out how we plan for that. Even if it's shipment patterns, that's one that I've commonly seen in my past where, you see that random spike in demand every 5 weeks or whatever. It's digging in and figuring out, okay, that's a customer waiting for full truckloads. They order on the 1st of every month. That's the kind of business intelligence that can help steer your plans in the right direction. And when we're looking at an AZ item, it's still really high dollars, so we want to make sure we're nailing that plan as best we can. So that's worth the time and investment. As we go down to the C's, the CX items, my team's still going to model these. We're still going to make sure that they're predictable. There's no reason we shouldn't be forecasting, but we're sure not going to spend a lot of time on them. As we move over to the CZ items, though, they're not predictable. They're not worth my team spending the time on. They're low risk to the business. So we're going to put this on a Kanban. We're going to put this on a min-max strategy or something like that on the supply side just to trigger auto reordering. And we're not going to spend a lot of time focused on those, if at all. And this really helps my planners, because what we'll do is we'll integrate these codes into our exception tools. We'll put them into our metric reporting and things like that, so they can filter and say, how am I doing on the SKUs I'm being asked to forecast, not necessarily how am I doing on the ones we're choosing to ignore and so forth. So it's a really easy way to kind of help prioritize and integrate that into your planning process. And the other thing I have here, just to kind of show you a visual example, is I take our coefficient of variation at a SKU level, and these are all individual SKUs that you see mapped out here, and I compare that to our forecast accuracy. So the principle here again being, if 0.3 or lower from a coefficient of variation standpoint is low volatility, and therefore highly statistically predictable, then we should be able to fix these SKUs. So this gives my planning team some areas to focus in on and say, like, we should be able to get a better result from this. So do we have the wrong statistical model applied? Did we get some bad business intelligence we need to kind of correct? Whatever those different things are that we want to go in and hone in, it really gives an exception for the team to kind of look at And then the stuff out here that's, again, really unpredictable, we're probably not going to spend a lot of time on. So just wanted to kind of share that out just to say that's a couple of basic principles of how we're doing that sort of thing. And then lastly, from the exception side, so I also wanted to show this because I think, again, a lot of companies kind of don't know where to get started sometimes, as I've gone into companies and talked to some leaders of like, hey, how do we start getting our hands on bias and things like that? And this is one super basic tool that has been highly effective. I still use this today, just to be honest, but I made it generic so it doesn't actually show items and stuff like that. But you can see basically this just has the item number, the business unit, the DC location, as I shared before. So this is that same low level granularity that we're being measured against. And you can see over a 12-week period, here's what our bias is. So this is in units. So this is, if it's blue, it's over forecasted. If it's orange, it's under forecasted. And then you can see over here, the last four columns, it basically shows a percentage of over or under forecasting. So this helps me gauge what I need to prioritize. Because if I'm over forecasting on a SKU by 300%, that's a problem. That's a huge problem, and I need to fix that right away. If I'm over forecasted by 20%, like on this SKU, compared to the rest of these, that's not so bad. I'm probably not going to spend, that's probably not going to be the first place I start, right? So what I like about a tool like this is it's easy. You can slice and dice it. You can filter it any way you need to. But more importantly, for onboarding new planners, this is a really easy way to get them embedded in the process and be able to find these exceptions. Demand planning is complicated. Forecasting tools are complicated to learn. This is a really simple way to get them started, at least say, here's the things I need that are off the rails and I need to fix. So it's a really intuitive way to kind of get to that. So just wanted to share this. This is something you can do even if you're planning in Excel. As long as you have snapshots of your data, you can build something like this really easily. So metrics and performance. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I always get a lot of questions when I'm discussing demand planning with other folks in business. So I just wanted to kind of cover this quickly. So we're measuring forecast accuracy, as I said, at the weekly, item, business unit, and distribution center level on an 8-week lag. So basically 2 months out. That's a really, really strict forecast accuracy metric. To give you a comparison, most CPG companies use a national item monthly level forecast to benchmark and create their accuracy. So for us, it's definitely a very strict metric, but we think it's really important because this really indicates, are we getting the right product to the right place at the right time when our stores need it? So you can see an example. I just picked a generic product group, but you can see how we'll kind of look at the trend. The green, the light green's the previous year, dark green's the current year, and we have bias down here and weighted MAPE up top. So I'll explain those two really quickly. So weighted mean absolute percentage error, it basically just takes the absolute value of that miss at that lowest location level and sums it up, and you basically divide it against your shipments. I won't get into the math of it. You can Google it if you're interested in learning more about it, but it's a pretty standard metric for forecast accuracy. But really what it tells you is how well did you forecast the mix of those items within your grouping, right? It's about, are we getting those items correct at the right location at the right time? And we weighted in dollars to prioritize higher cost items. So for example, if you miss by 1,000 units on a 10-cent item and you miss by 1,000 units on a $100 item, obviously the $100 item is going to be more of a concern and we want to get that dialed in. So it just helps us steer in the right direction to make sure we're fixing the right items. And then from a bias standpoint, it's how over or under we're forecasted. And you can look at this at any level of aggregation. But to me, this is a really important metric, and I use this all the time. Whether it's, it kind of can help flesh out some of the human bias, or if your system's injecting bias, like with, let's say you're starting to hit a slowdown in business and your model's still projecting a really high trend, that type of thing. It can be a really quick indicator of, hey, I need to go in and make sure that we're adjusting our models to be a little more conservative or something like that. But I also like it because you can see, hey, I have a planner who's just always really optimistic, and they can continue to keep thinking we're hitting this. Or again, working with the sales team of, yeah, we're gonna hit our number this month. Let's go in and let's go all in on it. And we don't always do that, right? So it can just help to flesh out where we potentially need to adjust our plans and bring our bias online. So just wanted to kind of cover that quickly. And I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on S&OP. I want to make sure we leave time for questions and discussion, but S&OP is an important part of what we're doing. Obviously, it's how we collaborate and make sure we're staying to plan. But it's a pretty standard S&OP process. Really, we have a we start with the product review. Essentially, that's our portfolio management process, where that's going to flow in any changes, any innovation, any discontinuations, any things we want to shift within the business are going to flow into our demand signal. We refine that, process it into the demand review, align on it. It's going to flow to the supply plan. The supply and sourcing teams will then analyze if there's anything we need to do to reconcile any gaps or any capacity constraints, concerns, anything like that. And then if there's any capital investment needed or strategic decisions or trade-offs that we need to analyze from a financial perspective, we'll kind of pass it over to our executive team and let them hash it out. And then that flows back through once we get decisions and kind of kicks the cycle off over again. From an input standpoint, though, it's pretty basic stuff, right? We're talking about metrics, we're talking about KPIs, we're talking about emerging sales and consumer trends. A lot of that is mainly the demand sensing stuff. That's where we really bring a lot of value to the conversation, because it's like, hey, emerging trend, here's where we're seeing risk. What do we want to do about this? So risk and opportunities is a big part of our conversation. And then new product alignments, we're a big company. New products are our riskiest thing that we take on, as most companies are. So we want to make sure we're all aligned on as we move forward into new products specifically. But pretty standard S&OP process outside of that. But I think that covers all the slide content. Hopefully that was insightful. Again, I wasn't sure how many folks on the call were going to be specifically demand planning versus other functions. So I wanted to kind of keep it a little general, but happy to answer any specific questions too as you have them.
Thank you, Brian. This was wonderful. I mean, very good high-level view of the process. So we are open to questions now, people. Let me start if nobody have a lot of questions. So the store level ordering is independent, or is it part of this entire system?
So we have a team that focuses specifically on replenishment. So they're doing a very short term. They're doing a very short term plan at a store level. Usually looking out at a couple months at the most, and they're pushing product to stores for specific categories, and then there are categories like beverage where we're still letting the stores order just because we want them to have the capability to order up for events and things like that they know are coming into their stores and so forth. But yeah, they have a full suite of analytics. We have an A&I team that's analytics and insights team. I shouldn't use acronyms that support the algorithms and all that stuff that flow into there. So it's a pretty complex process of how that all comes to light. As you can imagine, there's a lot of nuance to stores and things like that, but we're trying to get more sophisticated, not only with sales and those types of signals, but also looking at events, those mini events that are happening. So what we're trying to get more sophisticated with is, hey, the Super Bowl is going to be in this city, and these stores are in this vicinity, that type of thing, so that we can have more product flowing to stores and things like that. So we're getting more sophisticated every day with how we're replenishing our stores.
Any other questions?
Hi, Brian. This is Pete Rosano. I have a question.
Hi, Pete.
First off, thank you very much for your talk and walkthrough. It was great. It was nice to see a sophisticated practitioner leader type of presentation on demand management. So my compliments. My question to you is with regard to performance measures. So you did a nice job of weighted MAPE and bias and sort of at the practitioner level. I was wondering if you could share with us perhaps, how would you frame demand management performance at a board level? How would you convey your all's performance? What are high level measures for success for you at the end of the day, at the end of the month, end of the year? Just wondering if you could maybe you don't have to get into the nuts, but just more of a paint that picture high level. What does success look like for demand management organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously we share the metrics I shared at a higher level, and we try to quantify that. But really where we're trying to get more sophisticated in how we share that out with our leadership teams is it's more of that integrated pyramid. You've probably seen it in some diagrams and things like that, but how that pyramid interacts together. So forecast accuracy is one piece of it, but how it impacts our fill rates, how it impacts our transportation lanes, all those other things. They're all interconnected, and we have cost savings goals associated with all that stuff, right? Like any company does. So we just try to bring it together and try to triangulate and highlight how that's impacting the business. Where we have not gone yet, or we haven't gotten to yet in a successful manner, is quantifying accuracy in dollars, right? I think that's something I've heard. I haven't heard a company doing it successfully. So certainly, if you figured it out, please let me know, because I've continued to struggle with this. But how do you quantify the actual dollar impact of having more accurate forecasts? It's a very, very tough thing to get right, because even if you have a perfect forecast, you're still going to have supply disruptions, you know, and trying to, when you filter out all the noise of that stuff on an annualized basis, it's very difficult to kind of triangulate and say, well, we improved our weighted MAPE by 5%, so therefore we saved the company $20 million. Like that's something that I haven't figured out how to formulaically come to or anything. So I don't know if that's like the vein of the question, but generally speaking, it's really just about the performance, how it's allowed us to achieve our revenue goals, and kind of tying it to revenue as much as possible is the high level answer I'd probably give.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate that. The only thing I would offer, and I'm not saying it's an ideal one, but I've seen other practitioners use that forecasted value add. Not to say that that's the holy grail, but again, it's cracking the nut that you just described of how do you translate those operational demand management performance KPIs and translate them into dollars. And so there I don't know there is a holy grail out there, but welcome others' inputs as well. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, no problem. And you mentioned forecast value add too. So that's something I didn't present here today, but that is also something we're always consistently looking at, more from the lens of, again, that category. Which categories can we improve? Where is the system giving us a good result? Where do we need to potentially focus more energy and effort? Because as we know, sometimes touching the forecast can actually make it worse. So we're trying to be able to understand that and correct those things where we can. Again, a lot of reasons that bias can get interjected in the process a lot of different ways, but that's absolutely another way to kind of quantify at least the value add of the demand planner. So that's a great point.
Thank you. Yeah. Other questions, please. How have you guys moved on to demand shaping? That's something I've heard of influencing consumer demand. And so demand guys becoming salespeople per se.
Yeah, it's interesting because you do step into that sales realm very quickly. And it's been kind of interesting watching that evolution with my team, because the more and more sophisticated we get at analyzing those sales trends and picking them up, we find that we're more and more engaged and involved in those conversations. And in a lot of ways, we're more sought after to have conversations around strategic planning. Where do we think categories are headed? Whereas before, we were talking two very different things. We were talking, well, here's how much vanilla syrup I'm going to ship to the store. And they're like, well, here's how many vanilla lattes I'm going to sell. And it was very hard to kind of bring that conversation together. I'm giving one specific example, but demand shaping, it's really just been my team's ingenuity in bringing tools together and looking at data different ways. So we, obviously there's recipes and things like that. They first had to build the models, have it flow in, have the data kind of come in. And now we have exceptions at various levels that we can really get fine tuned, and we catch those trends immediately. So it's really cool to see that progression with the team over time. But in some ways too, I mean, obviously you have to have the sales data available, but in some ways too, it's not overly complicated to do that. It's just really setting the right parameters so you can really pick out what's going to impact the plans, what's going to matter, and when do we need to escalate risk and opportunities to our leadership teams. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you. Yeah. And sets me thinking, about, how we're changing as a profession.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because I think in a lot of B2B environments and things like that, there are some B2B environments you're just never going to have customer data, so to speak. Like if you work in industrial sectors and things like that, you're not always going to have consumption data that you're going to be able to kind of look at. But there are data points that you can bring in to add value to the process, right? So I think it's always just what's that data point that's a little interesting. I always think about the example that was shared at a conference a couple of years ago, and somebody was talking about they were always looking at diesel prices for some big heavy or GDPs of nations for heavy equipment and things like that, and what the risk and opportunities for their business was going to be. And it was actually driven by diesel prices. And that, like, once they ran more causal modeling and things like that, they were able to find out that was the direct correlation. And, now they can make more effective business decisions. So, sometimes it's just thinking outside the box and bringing different data points together. But.
Hey, good afternoon, Brian. This is Lance. I have a quick question as it relates to technology. Is there any technology that's out there that you kind of quote unquote wish you had, or Starbucks opened up the checkbooks that you could get access to?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lance. Appreciate it. My answer to that would be, I don't think it exists yet for my dream state tool, right? I think we still have a long way to go as far as those things come together. The way I would describe it is, if I could see a tool that would be perfect, it would be kind of like your Google Maps. You're going down the road of your business on a daily basis, whatever that is, and it's going to tell you, hey, there's a more profitable route, or hey, there's going to be a hiccup here. I just don't think our end-to-end planning tools are integrated enough yet, but I think things like demand planning and supply planning and all that stuff, I think it's eventually just going to be business planning at some point. This is just I have no reason to be saying this other than my hypothesis, but I think eventually you just come as one collective team and make business decisions because you can see the inputs and outputs of it. But yes, as it pertains today, I would love to, I can't say I found a tool that I'm like, this is the one that I absolutely want to have, but there are certainly capabilities that are out there that are increasingly complex and integrated. And I think, I've seen some companies take a stab at end-to-end planning. It's not quite there yet. There's too many complexities. And I think the other thing is businesses have too many specific nuances for that to be, readily adaptable to an end-to-end tool. So I think there's some of that too, but it's coming at some point. From a forecasting perspective, though, I would just say tools have come a long way. They're continuing to get better. It's just, we were just talking about it at the beginning of this before the presentation. I'm curious to see how the output of those forecasting tools gets a little more refined, because again, I think what's going to be more valuable to a demand planner to have a conversation with the leader or with their sales teams or whoever they're talking to is, here's what the model is showing, and here's how much marketing is driving that. Here's how much the economy is driving that. Here's how much whatever all those influencing factors are, so you can pull those different levers and impact them, right? Like if the marketing's not enough, hey, we can spend more and do more on the marketing end. Right now, a lot of systems are still kind of just giving a single number output. It's a little hard to contextualize sometimes.
Yeah. Just on that note, I posted a link of something we've developed at FGCU, our supply chain area. We've created a forecasting tool. So you put in, it's designed for monthly data. It's completely free. If you have monthly data, you can upload it here. It'll use multiple methods. You can choose the method that best works for you, and see the errors, the biases, and then select. So yeah, we are working. So Lance, hopefully I've noted what you talked about. I'll see if we can work around and create a more complex tool that works for you.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? We can go on for a few more minutes.
Hey, Brian, this is Pete again. I just had one quick one for you. Earlier, you mentioned some conferences you attended, sir. As an experienced demand management professional, I was wondering if there are any leading demand management trade organizations or professional associations that you'd recommend to, an early mid-career demand management professional?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've worked with the Institute of Business Forecasting a lot. I think they do a great job. They get a really good group together. Their content's always, they try to keep the content fresh, and sometimes it gets a little too futuristic for practicality, I think, for some spaces. But I think they do a really good job, and they have a really good program. They have training platforms and stuff, which I've found to be pretty helpful with my team. So I'd recommend them. They have a quarterly publication, I think they come out. So there's, some interesting stuff that's published in some of the articles. But the conferences, for me, it's not necessarily even just the presentations, but it's more just the connecting with other demand professionals. That's really been great for me. I've got a lot of insights of just talking to different companies and figuring out how they overcome challenges and problems. And it's an open sharing thing, which is pretty cool.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I've put the link for the Institute of Demand Forecasting on the chat. So if anybody wants to pick that up and use that to learn, please.
I had a question, sorry.
Go
Hi,
ahead, Judy.
Brian. Sorry, I joined late, so maybe you mentioned about this. So do you foresee any supply chain network changes in the near future as things, everything almost changed, the disruptions and everything, but I don't know how much it affected Starbucks, but just do you foresee anything that kind of drastic or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've seen as much volatility as any company recently. I mean, again, we're sourcing, equipment from overseas. We have just commodities that are coming from all over the world. Like there have been challenges. I'll leave it at that. But yes, it is forcing us to think about things differently, coming up with different sourcing strategies to make to be even more diverse and flexible, things like that. And I think what's encouraging is that there's always this balance. I think sourcing is an example where it's cost versus supportability or reliability. And I think that balance is skewing more to the reliability side at this point. So that's great for someone in supply chain to see that the company's investing in making sure we have reliability and not necessarily just focused on the lowest cost option. I think a lot of businesses obviously have been forced into that type of decision making. Other things that we're seeing is with specific categories, we're trying to go more domestic where possible, and try to have closer supply chains to home, just with the recency of things that have happened. But overall, there's a lot of things that are happening. And the thing is, we're not even remotely out of the woods yet. Like there's still shipping challenges, there's still container cost and delay issues. There are so many things that we're trying to solve through. So I think it's really about how do we support the immediate needs of the business. But I think the more things settle down, then we'll be able to focus on like how do we make our business a little more resilient to those types of things happening and impacting us. I mean, that's really what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, we are exceeded our time by 4 minutes, so I'll stop here. I had 2 quick announcements before we end, and before I thank Brian, actually. I put the link for our next webinar, which is on October 12th. The webinar is learning from the collision of USS John S. McCain. So if you recollect, in 2017, the Navy ship with extremely high technologies had a crash that should have never happened. The idea is to learn from that. How can we learn from supply chain? So we have somebody, an ex-Navy person, Dr. Ralph So. He's going to take us through this journey of learning the supply chain learnings that we can have from that collision. Second is we have, as you know, the Center for Supply Chain is partners with APIX or ASCM. And we have our CSCP review program scheduled. So I've put that link. Anybody interested, any business on the CSCP review program, please check the link and register for that review program. Well, thank you, everybody. As usual, this is our usual thing now, second Wednesday of every month that we join to learn something new about supply chains. Brian, thank you very much for your time. A very engaging presentation. I hope all of us can use your presentation and improve our own journeys on demand management and create better fulfillment and better profits.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And I'm local in the area. I'm in Sarasota. So if anybody ever wants to bounce any ideas or ask any questions about implementing any of the stuff we discussed, always happy to connect.
Thank you. We will definitely.